Good afternoon, rather, and welcome to the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies here at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. My name is Bernie Schlager. I use he, they pronouns, and I serve as Executive Director for CLGS, the center here at PSR. So again, welcome. Today we are hosting our third Queering the 2024 Vote workshop with Rachael Ward, who comes to us from the United Church of Christ's 2024 Love is Louder, Love Your Neighbor Out Loud campaign. This campaign faithfully supports the spiritual, physical, and mental well-being of LGBTQIA+ siblings by equipping faith communities with resources and tools for justice, action, and care. The campaign features toolkits, advocacy 101 webinars that help equip communities with the toolkit's wisdom and other pressing topics. A Love is Louder T-shirt that supports discretionary funds for churches and communities working with LGBTQIA+ siblings, and on-the-ground actions throughout the year in different U.S. regions to support group growth of the movement. Before I introduce our workshop leader and coordinator, let me just share with you a few housekeeping details. This event is being recorded and live streamed, and it will be posted for later viewing. We will not record nor post the chat feature. We ask you, if possible, to turn off any virtual or blurry backgrounds, since that can cause vision problems for some folks. And so let me introduce our workshop coordinator, our speaker. Rachael Ward, they, them, is a queer practical theologian who cares deeply about intersectional work by creating space, collaborative humanity, and practices of freedom toward transformation. They serve as minister and team lead of gender and sexuality justice for the national setting of the United Church of Christ. They are an authorized lay minister for this role through the Penn Central Conference as an active member in discernment. Rachael has founded several movements devoted to transformation of queer bodies, such as Bible Query, Atlanta LGBTQIA+ History Project, How to Be Human podcast, and more. They believe in the cyclical nature of life and death and infinite possibilities for transformation within our shared unique imprint of the Imago Dei. Rachael approaches care through the lens of activism, pastoral presence, and queer scholarship. And they ground their work within ministry, activism, and scholarship through Adrienne Marie Brown's emergent strategy. So enough for me. A warm welcome to Rachael, who will now share with us about Love is Louder. Welcome, Rachael.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be with you all today and those who are watching afterwards throughout the online portal that exists for us to reach one another. I'm going to just set up my presentation screen and we'll get started together. Great. And if someone can give me a thumbs up so I know that it's showing the Queering Our Narratives for Change screen. Awesome. Thank you so much. So when thinking about how to share about Love is Louder today with you all, I really wanted to hone in on how queering our narratives can create change. And of course, I can't talk about change without having a quote from Octavia Butler: all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. What I know to be true of change is the stories we tell ourselves, or the stories forced upon us, are the foundational starting point for possibility, healing, and change work to begin. And my greatest hope in any moment of interaction or movement building is that folks around me will start to embody that change is full of infinite possibilities, and we are capable of creating loving, just, filled change together. So I don't know about you, but I love a roadmap. I like to know where I'm going when I'm spending time with friends or new friends. So this is kind of the overview of what we'll talk about today. I'm going to give you an introduction to what I call is queer practical theology. I am a queer practical theologian through and through. And this is the lens that I use in justice work and that we use at the Gender and Sexuality Justice Team, as you heard, as a part of the national setting of the United Church of Christ. Then we'll kind of move into a context for why the creation of Love is Louder, how that came about, what it is. And then we'll talk about how Love is Louder is growing and supporting narrative shifts, not just in the United Church of Christ, but in the surrounding communities where those churches exist. So let's start with queer practical theology. So this is and like a part of my thesis work that remains and lives and breathes with me. Um, this is how I identify in the world. I hold a Master of Arts in Practical Theology, and I spent a majority of my dual degree program here in Atlanta, by the way, that's where I'm coming to you from, studying and researching and creating narrative care movements through the embodiment of queering. And queer practical theology is my baby. And it is also my life, my lived reality as a queer person. And I deeply, deeply believe that it holds within it room to discover transformation for all. So I kind of gave a brief kind of synopsis of how I would define this. And when I use the word define, I am using it very, very clearly. And that means that it's fluid, it's messy, it can bend, it can move, it can breathe. Queer practical theology to me is a healing theology rooted in activism, in the public square, in church and academy for embodiment. And it's deeply committed to the wholeness of queer bodies and the transformation of all through living practices of freedom. And you kind of heard that phrase in my intro bio about who I am and how I focus on collaborative humanity and practices of freedom. We're going to get to that together. So this is the lens of theology that supports the way I approach the needs of the people that I doula with. And it maintains the rooted belief really in my backbone that there are infinite possibilities amongst us at all times and that we are here to mirror that with each other. And I view queer practical theology as a personal and political disruption to the notion that suffering is necessary as an entry point to freedom. And I want to say that again. I view this lens as a personal and political disruption that suffering is necessary for us to get free. So the root of this work lives in narrative. The ethos of queer practical theology is practicing freedom in ongoing moments of liberation and possibilities. And the hope is embodiment creating more authentic human and spiritual connection across the lived realities of all bodies. If we're thinking about the phrase that we often hear and see at protests, at marches, that is far back within our history of liberation marches. Not everyone isn't free until everyone is free, correct? Right? So thinking about the lived realities of all bodies, even though this is queer in its essence, queering is for all people. It is for the change and the root of transformation. It isn't just for the queer bodies, but it's for all bodies. So, in other words, it is a practice to get free, and the offerings that we can provide to one another can offer liberation. So, this little flow chart, cyclical moment here are kind of the four moves that I use when considering creating or reevaluating movement work. I talk about anything that we do within gender and sexuality justice as movement work, because my hope is that our bodies are moving, our spirits are moving, the mental joy of the erotic nature of who we are is moving and breathing. Movement work is ongoing and inviting and leaves imprints for others to come and carry and continue. So I really do talk about justice work as movement work all the time. So practicing freedom means being fluid, getting messy, living in the both and not yet, and staying as present as possible with your own body so that you can listen deeply to others. And that also, I want to say, the reality is that sometimes we can't stay present. And so the hope is that this is a communal thing that we do. And this model right here, begins with a commitment, a making space, to being collaborative within humanity, to a consistency of interrogation, a critique that isn't negative, but a critique that is looking for who's missing, what's needed, who do we need to become, on and over and over again, so that we're staying in that practice with one another. So this is where we can veer for a second and dive into context and talk about Love is Louder and how this model right here, this commit, make, fake, collaborative humanity interrogation takes place within Love is Louder itself. So you did hear the kind of overview of Love is Louder, Love Your Neighbor Out Loud, that it's initiative of our justice team, and that we're looking at that embodiment again, right? Supporting spiritual, physical, and mental well-being of queer siblings. And we're doing that by equipping faith-based communities. And we say faith-based communities because, there are a variety of ways of which people serve within their faith, whatever that may be to them, right? I care and I'm concerned about the liberation and the ability to flourish for queer folks and all people. And that's within faith-based communities, that's within churches, that's within nonprofits, that's at our dinner tables where we feed one another. So we're doing that with resources and tools that are focusing on just action, which means that it's justice oriented, that it's focused on transformation, and that it's focused on care. The reason that Love is Louder was even born into a surprise moment for us is what I'll say. I have been in this role since April of 2023, which sometimes I'm like, whoa, that wasn't too long ago. And other times I feel like that was so long ago, both in really beautiful, wonderful ways. We had our General Synod last year, and I knew that we were going to enter 2024 with some really, really horrific legislation taking place, some really, extra hateful rhetoric that could take place and harm. And I was looking to see if the church, if the people could commit to something that would spearhead a movement in caring and taking care of queer folks and really all of us. That started with this T-shirt that you heard mentioned. It came to Synod and it was sold out at Synod by the last day. And people were wearing them everywhere. So it was an indicator that the church was ready to say yes to this really scripturally based slogan of loving your neighbor and doing it in a way that's bold. It was a direct response from the first 3 months of me being in this role last year and listening to pastors, listening to folks on the ground who were saying they didn't know how to show up at the Capitol. They didn't know how to speak to queer issues. They were afraid they were going to misspeak. They didn't know how to find the folks that were ready to do the action with them. They didn't know how to educate or teach, that they were scared they were going to hurt someone or cause further harm. And on the other side of that, parents of queer kids or parents and allies who were saying, we need things in order to go out, in order to show up as folks who believe in the love of God being spoken, seen, experienced. So Love is Louder was born out of out of a happenstance moment, really, because the shirt was in part to see if we were ready, and the shirt was also a way to create a special fund to support the discretionary fund idea, dream of being able to support churches who would reach out, who were looking for a way to start a discretionary fund focusing on the care of queer folks. So that became this initiative that lives under our queer justice portfolio. We do have advocacy 101 webinars that go with our toolkit releases. They live forever and ever in the digital stratosphere on our Love is Louder site, which you'll have access to. And all of these things are free. They're all free on purpose because access is so critical and so important. You already know about the T-shirt. When people buy this T-shirt through what we call UCC resources, some of that comes back into our special funds, so it can go back into the life of the church and communities who need it most. And then we had this piece I want to talk to you about called Love is Louder, Love Your Neighbor Out Loud Tour. This was a big dream. The dream was we'll go to places that are being hit really hard with legislation, and we'll go to those local contexts and we'll help that local context get the work done that they can't figure out how to do or couldn't galvanize or empower folks to show up to. So we did this. We'll be entering our second tour stop, which is here in Atlanta, where I live, this weekend, actually. So send all of your love and pride joy to us as we march together. But what this looks like in theory is modeling behavior. So what I know to be true too is that when we can model behavior to each other, it helps shift narratives or the embrace of new narratives from this impossibility, we will never figure this out, to, oh my gosh, there are so many possibilities of how we can do it. So the initiative has that educational support, that fiscal support that help draw in the awareness. But the practice part is the modeling behavior of shifting narrative from, the I don't knows to the, the A to the Z of the issues that they're confusing, to empowering those in their local context to embody the very love they have to give by simply showing up. So the idea was, can we go into local context? Can we help equip them for change through an embodiment moment? And will the local context say yes to practicing freedom together more than just that moment? Using this queer practical theology overarch of practicing freedom. So can they commit? Can they make space? Will they collaborate in a new way? And will they interrogate together? The answer to that is absolutely an overwhelming yes. When we did this in Cleveland, that was our first stop. We worked with a conference and an association, which, if you know how UCC Polity works, we have so much autonomy, right? And so sometimes we can forget about our neighbors and we can forget to call in and ask and invite. And so we had a conference association come together and say yes to this bold idea of, we want to get as many UCC churches that exist in the Cleveland area and some to come march in Cleveland Pride as one under the banner of Love is Louder. And then we want to see what you need. How can we help take this moment that we're empowering folks and help you see the things that you've been trying to build? Which for this context was, we really want to have this advocacy group where folks can rely on each other. We have contacts, we know who we can call, we can show up at capitals together, we can take care of our people. And we just couldn't figure out how to get that yes, because people hadn't had the tangible experience of change. They needed to taste it a little bit. We had no idea, right, what was going to happen the day of the march. We organized, we had a group of 6 people who said yes to each other across conference association space, who worked and who were really the drivers. The modeling behavior component is if you stay in the room and you do all the work, then when you leave the room, no one's going to know how to drive. And so the folks at the local level were the ones really ensuring that they were taking these movement pieces, asking these questions, connecting and networking. What ended up happening is we had over 300 people from across not only conference and association, but people who drove 2 to 3 hours to come to Cleveland and march. They brought their church banners and they had those with them, but they were full of excitement to know that they were coming together with the body of Christ in this way to literally express in their movement, in their empowerment embodiment together, that love is indeed louder. Y'all, I cried a lot. I'm very tender. I'm a very emotional person. But when I saw this giant pride flag that's 25 years old be held by multiple churches, teens, queer kiddos who had come with their dad for the first time from a rural area that they knew they couldn't like have pride there, tears abound. And what happened also was joy, joy to say, yes, we're going to do this again next year. How can we do this throughout the year? We had a worship service the next day because that's what the local context also wanted. We had multiple churches come to that service. We had people who met us at our tent. As a church, we had a line at our tent, at our booth. A church had a line at their booth. We had so many youth who came up, who said thank you, who asked if they could find churches that were like the ones marching with us. It was absolutely just mind-blowing beyond belief. Even in my soul, knowing it was possible, it was just so moving. And so this conference and association have worked together. They have continued their movements. They have done so many different things. They went to each other's prides throughout the rest of June and that month. And we're about to do the same movement here in Atlanta. And in Atlanta, we have 4 UCC churches. This is in the South. We have a lower number of United Church of Christ churches in the South, but they are mighty. We have the 4 that are here marching together. And then we also have the largest Presbyterian church that's across the street from the Capitol here marching with us. So now it's more than just our denomination, it's partner denomination churches with us. And for the first time in the Pride Parade here, we will have a unification of churches marching together. And they have agreed in their organizing meetings to form a coalition with one another and to utilize their spaces to support those who are going to the Capitol during legislative sessions. It's just been amazing to bear witness to people seeing infinite possibility and for people to say yes and commit and continue that work. So that's kind of like the big external piece. This is a QR code because I want everybody to have access to these things and to be able to ask questions. For any reason under the sun, if the QR code is being rude to you today, although I tested it, that link right there, ucc.org/love-is-louder, will take you to our site page. On that site page, you'll see each of these toolkits that are out right now. You'll see how to get the T-shirt. You'll see the webinars. You'll be able to have access to all of those things. The toolkits are PDFs so that you can download them. And that worship resource is actually from the worship service that I mentioned we had in Cleveland. It is an absolute joy to see queer practical theology live and to see folks say yes to this. And it is all over. I have staff who send me pictures when they are out for regional youth events in the Midwest of a church who has the T-shirt pinned up on their bulletin board with their own personal message of why they believe love is louder. You know, we have churches in Ohio who created videos to share and to send out, encouraging people to vote. We had registration and voting conversations at the worship service about issues that they need to be familiar with or could be familiar with. You don't have to directly talk about politics itself or voting itself in order to make change in the ways people may approach the work that gets them to the polls or gets them more involved in what is personal is political, political is personal. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to see if there are any questions, and I'm happy to engage with you all that way too. But thank you so much for letting me share a bit about that work, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel, especially framing it within your own call and work as a queer practical theologian. Really beautiful and powerful. Folks, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves, ask them, use the chat feature. We have about 17 people on Facebook. They're a little behind us, a few seconds, but they've put in already about 8 or 9 questions for me to read. But I'd like to offer the people in the room first opportunity to say something. Bianca, please.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this workshop today. I also identify with UCC, and my grandmother was a part of a UCC church in Berkeley for 40 years, so I'm continuing that legacy in the UCC. I don't know, your point of suffering is necessary for us to get to freedom. I don't know how to put this question, but I read something online about your kind of personal journey, of kind of going through like a wilderness for some time that involved maybe mental health, and different things. And I feel like that's been a big part of my seminary journey, is kind of coming out of a wilderness that involved depression, for me, food issues, but Holy Spirit leading me to seminary, to find this community, to come back to the UCC. I don't know, I don't know if you could speak on that or share any parts of that journey, and especially how you feel like maybe that journey led to freedom. But I don't know, that really spoke to me, especially the theme of wilderness, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for sharing that with me and with everyone here too. I I think that the UCC makes sense to me for so many reasons, because I am comprised of so many different denominations on my journey to find the place that I would call home. My initial upbringing is a Southern Baptist, and the atonement theology within that, and with a little bit of the Presbyterian, a little bit of the Southern Baptist, is that suffering is something that you have to endure in order to experience your way to liberation and freedom. Especially within queer narratives and the way that we talk about queer experiences. And I absolutely refute that. That does not fully help queer folks move through, a question I like to ask within my own narrative care model. You could also visit my site, which is kind of messy right now. It needs to be cleaned up a bit. I have this job and I haven't touched my site in a while, but queerandfate.com does have my living death doula work on there, which has my narrative care model available again for free, because I believe in that. It's a question of like, who told you that you had to fit? Who told you that needed to be this way? And a release, and really a rediscovery of like what belongs to you and what doesn't belong to you, and processing and leaving behind what's unuseful and picking up what is useful. There's a lot of times there are faith practices or theologies we learned as younger folks, especially as queer folks, that were meaningful, and we do still carry those with us as adults in our practices now, but they've changed some, right? There are pieces of those that have been adapted. Those are pieces of those where we realize that wasn't real, but this was. And there's that relationship to our actual like authentic selves that we get to engage with, that help us kind of really parse out what was of use and what wasn't. What needs to die in order for the resurrection moment that you need in your narrative, that will have ripple effects for the folks around you, whether you get to see that or not. And I participated in this, suffering model for a very long time. If you look at writings and books and articles as you're in seminary right now, the reason why I wrote this thesis, which the full title is, Queering Practical Theology, Tending to Queer Bodies, is because I was exhausted with the reality that the only thing I could read within queer theology or some other, gray area was death, was suffering, that a queer person had to tell their suffering story in order to ask for help. But by the time they got to the end of their article or the book, you had this much of the how or the why or the hope or the joy or the practice. And I feel like that's just kind of a reoppression of having to keep that suffering with you, as opposed to releasing it and saying, no, I deserve more than that. Like, I was made for more than that. I could talk about that for hours. But that's the reason why I really rooted myself in this life cycle that allows for us to let that go. And to be able to see hope and joy as the first thing that we move through, not the last. So
Thank you.
yeah, of course.
Kathleen, please.
Yes, that was fascinating listening. I think I misunderstood you, Rachel. At first, I thought you said that suffering was necessary. Which I understand, because we all suffer in life. I mean, suffering is there, but it's not. But you're not saying that it's necessary to. The more you suffer, the better you feel later. I mean, it's not. Which now I understand. It's something we need to relieve. Suffering is something we need to relieve, right? If one suffers, maybe there are narratives where one doesn't suffer that much because you have friends, relatives, or whatever, and there's a kind of just the natural path or whatever. But so now I understand that suffering isn't necessary, is it?
Yeah. So yeah, and I'm Southern, and sometimes I can mumble and slur some Southern context together there. But I'm going back to the slide to find that part where I'm talking about, I view queer practical theology as a personal and political disruption to this idea that suffering is necessary as an entry point to freedom. Meaning that as queer people, we have to talk about our suffering in order to demand our freedom. That the only way we can be in this conversation, the only way that we can make change possible, is to only talk about the suffering component.
And that's not what you're saying. You're saying the opposite of that, actually.
I am saying the opposite of that. It's important to understand and contextualize what's going on and the harm that's taking place to queer people. And there is a place for that.
Yes.
But queer people, queer bodies having to do that narrative over and over and over again and be the ones amplifying that is only further creating harm for that person. And it doesn't make enough space for us to come together and to create active moments where we're empowering love, joy, movement.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So thank you. I'm really glad I got that clear in my mind. It just happens that I go to a Unitarian church in Berkeley. Actually, it's in Kensington, but they're called themselves the Unitarian Church of Berkeley, Unitarian Universalist. Anyway, we're just starting an LGBTQ plus group. I mean, like literally last Sunday. Okay. So
yeah.
Anyway, so I would really like to affiliate with, or I'm going to certainly share your page. And I was wondering if you have affiliations in the West, out in the West, any at all.
I mean, as far as UCC churches, or
no, well, I don't know. It doesn't sound like it sounds like you're open to other affiliations. Well, UCC, see, I'm just new in the seminary, so I think UCC used to be a kind of affiliate of Unitarians. I mean, in history, back Boston and whatever. But it seems to me that that's what you're saying. You're saying anyone who's interested, come, be a part, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So it would be a nice place to start, to just at least, we're having a meeting this Sunday again. So it'd be nice to talk about your program and, give people the access to some of your materials through the website and such.
Yeah, absolutely. I did put in this Zoom space chat, but again, it's a direct link to the second toolkit we put out, which is Gender and Sexuality plus Our Faith. And if you're starting a group, this is a really wonderful toolkit to kind of like start within, because it helps move through, the differences between gender and sexuality, some queer theology in accessible ways about, how, loving your queer neighbor is within the biblical text, and ways to kind of show up and engage in that dialogue. So I'm just offering that as an entry point. But yes, we partner with many, many people, and we're in rich partnership with the Unitarian Universalists. In 2025, it'll be 25 years of doing Our Whole Lives, which is our sex ed curriculum, which is absolutely incredible and life-saving, and of its own. Please go look at that if you're interested. There are many, many really wonderful things that take place when we come together and we collaborate together. So 1000%. If you have a light bulb moment and you have churches in your area who want to do something similar like this, I'm always here and open for conversation and to connect folks to each other. Yeah.
Okay, and you put that toolkit information in the chat. Is that what you said?
I did. I put the gender and sexuality toolkit in the chat, but again, you can find all of these at ucc.org/loveislauder.
Okay, and I've got that down too. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I feel very, like we're getting something going. I didn't initiate it, but I will certainly contribute. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Kathleen, check out First Congregational Church of Berkeley, which is a few blocks south of us here. They have a very long-standing, rich, queer set of programs and groups. So you might find some really important allies there. I appreciated your questions and your discussion about suffering. One of the things I teach here, Rachel, is LGBTQ history. And, as we know, for decades and decades, the only way that queer people could show up in mainstream literature or movies was a story of suffering, right? As long as the person died at the end or killed themselves or went to prison, then queer people could show up, but they had to disappear, and they had to suffer, and they had to, be some sort of sign of, the danger or evil of being queer, whatever that meant. And of course, that lasts in so many ways. And so telling a story that goes against that ingrained narrative is life-saving.
And then, of course, I just want to add the AIDS epidemic, which I was working in the Department of Psychiatry in San Francisco, and that was just coming up. And that was almost a lesson in reproducing. You have to suffer in order to, come out. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that gay life or homosexual life has been more acceptable because of the suffering during that time when everyone had somebody in their family, larger family anyway, who died of AIDS. It was a very traumatic time.
Yeah.
Still with us. It came up a lot for people.
Not over.
During COVID, because we were comparing, the last epidemic and how, there was a lot of poignancy in that. A lot. Yeah.
Yeah. This initiative is a complete, a counteract to that. Love is Louder is the counteract. It's not about uplifting, suffering or suffering narratives first. It's about, how do we show up and really and truly just demonstrate exactly what Scripture asks of us to do, which is to love our neighbors as we love ourselves with our whole hearts, as God loves us. And I do believe that when we do that, incredible things take place, change takes place. And I really do believe that that's what we're asked to do at the end of the day, is to tend to one another, and the rest will follow. That's that faith component of what you can't yet see, but is becoming.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you both. So I have a mix of questions and comments from Facebook. I'll read through them from our friends. One is, I so want to educate others about trans people and our human rights. And I wonder how I can, as a Christian, speak my truth in places where legislators want to deprive me of my civil rights. And I believe that they are operating chiefly out of fear. So I appreciate what you've said about modeling behavior, and I so want to create new narrative. Well, that's one from, thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.
Here's more of a question. I have a tendency to demonize those who so clearly want to continue to build a white Christian nationalist state. And I struggle. How do I approach my enemies in ways that don't see them as bad or as evil? Do you have any comments on that? And that's from Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think you said the first person's share name was Taylor. Taylor, the first toolkit releases communal care of trans and non-binary siblings, and it kind of has a 4-step process for internal and external audit. It's incredibly useful for groups who are trying to figure out like how to show up and do activism. And it's it doesn't say activism in the title, but I'm teaching you it. Sometimes when you say activism, people get concerned and need a little bit less of a straight on the nose context. But it's been widely used. We've had churches utilize it, conferences use it, and say thank you for it. So I did want to uplift that. Again, you can find that at the Love is Louder site. Yeah, this is the hardest thing, right? Like, even if it's not about this in particular, loving our neighbors means loving our enemies, including the ones who say really horrible things, do really horrible things, vote for really terrible laws, align themselves with institution and capitalism and colonialization, like all of those things, right? All the isms. I will say this. Everyone in this work of being human and folks who choose to be in justice work on the front lines or somewhere in that space, there are a variety of roles, right? There are people who are absolutely made to have those conversations with that enemy, right? They have the resiliency, they have the call to do it. It's not everyone's call. One of the gravest, most unuseful things that I see from queer Christian nonprofits and teachers is let's equip you with the biblical case and then tell you to go out and argue with people because that's going to do it. What that will do is harm you and get nowhere because the change isn't going to happen in convincing someone to take a new point. The change is going to happen in that modeling of behavior. Because you can argue with your enemy all day long. You can do that. But 9 times out of 10, it's exhausting to you, and that person isn't in the right space to be in that conversation. That's why they're arguing. The way I practice that now, where I am personally as myself, and in my boundaries about, what is mine and what isn't mine, as a Christian, as a minister in this role, is if you aren't ready to be in that dialogue with me, then I am happy to give you the resources to get you ready so that we can do that dialogue together. The beauty and the thing that I love about being a part of the United Church of Christ is that we are a wide tent of theologies. We come from a lot of different streams of thought, and any UCC church you walk into will be different. And the thing that kind of tethers us together, in my observation, and why I love UCC, is that we have this deep, deep belief in our siblinghood as Christians, that we're siblings in Christ together. That means we believe in sitting at the table and dialoguing, right? As a family. And I don't know about you, but every family is messy, and every family has arguments and enemies at the table that may say hurtful things. And sometimes when you're at the table with your siblings in Christ, there's a time when you get up from the table, and it is not an injustice that you are doing to yourself, and it is not an injustice that you're doing to that person. Because believe it or not, that behavior that you're modeling in that moment to get up and walk away and say, we're not getting anywhere anymore. I love you. I wish things hadn't gotten to this point. I'm going to step away, or, alter your position, change topic, whatever you need to do. There are some spaces that you're in where you cannot get up and leave. And I acknowledge and understand that is truth in my own experiences. But there is also the power of silence. When you leave a person alone in their own thoughts and you model a love ethic to them, something will happen. It might not be in that moment, and then you might not get to see it, but they have to go home and think about it. Now, there are others in spaces and places that are so ingrained in the rhetoric that they've heard. I don't know if they go home and think about it. But we can give people a merit experience of what is possible, and they get to choose. One of the greatest things that Creator gave us when we were formed and molded in our unique and wonderful selves is the power of choice. And humanity gets to choose. And humanity gets to choose if they're going to choose something useful or if they're going to choose something hurtful. They get to choose. And what also means in that power is you get to choose what you give, what you pray for, and when you get up and leave a situation, whether that's mind, body, spirit, or mental. Sometimes disassociation is helpful when you can't leave a space. Just go somewhere else for a second. Dream about Mario Kart if you need to, whatever have you. But I really do lean on the empowerment model of you get to choose how long you stay in a conversation like that. And honestly, if they're not ready or they're not there or they won't engage material for you to be able to have that conversation, that's not your journey. That's not your ministry at that moment. And there are others who are doing that work and who will pick that up alongside you. You're muted.
Thank you. So this is from Susan. Susan is from Plymouth United Church of Christ in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And her question is there any focus in the Love is Louder materials on training or working with young people? We encourage and are struggling somewhat to work with the young people in our large congregation to become politically active for justice as people of faith. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, Susan, that's a great question. The beauty of the 2 active toolkits that are out right now is you can really work within those, and you can take them and mold them to where you are. For youth directly, that is coming. That will be next year because we are in active conversation with a couple of different folks about co-creating intentionally resources geared for youth. I will say and uplift a resource you could check out right now. It's called Holy Disruptions. It's incredible curriculum. And I personally, this is one of the individuals we're talking to, but personally, this individual is a practical theologian and also writes this curriculum in a way where anyone could pick it up and utilize it. So once again, that's called Holy Disruptions. So good, so good. The third toolkit that we're looking at trying to put out in what we think of our working quarters, right? Q1, 2, 3, 4. So this last quarter of the year is trying to think about like a support toolkit for parents who have queer kids and kind of how to like navigate not only the faith aspect of that, but how to show up and love their queer kids well. That will be the third installment for this year. but we are 1,000% looking at that component that you're asking for, and you'll see that happen in 2025. It's just one of those things that needs to take a little bit more than my brain to write. It needs to be in community and very intentional, and with folks who are actively working with youth in that way. So thank you for asking. You all are the first to hear that that's what's going to happen next year. So congratulations. But for now, in the interim, Holy Disruptions is a great place to go. And we will at least have a toolkit focused on that parent to youth ratio. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Susan, for that question. This is a comment from Facebook from Cole. As a seminarian in the United Methodist Church, I want to be a clergy for all people, especially in the rural context which nourished me and to which I hope to return once ordained. Thank you. This workshop is giving me ways to think about how I might prepare to re-enter my rural context as an ordained clergy. And it is a place that seems to become more, is becoming more politically divisive every year, but certainly in a presidential election year. Thank you for that, Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Cole.
And I have another one from, again, if anyone in the room wants to unmute or speak into the space, please do. And this is from Shayna. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Shayna. How might a queer liberative practical theology enable dialogue for me who dismissed me because I'm a queer person of color? Thank you, Shayna, for that.
Will you repeat the question for me?
Sure. How might a queer liberative practical theology approach help me to dialogue with those who dismiss me because I'm a queer person of color?
Oh. I'm sorry. I just want to nerd out really bad right now. I would love to give you my thesis. It's not publicly available because one day portions of it will be something else. However, what I will say, you can find my email address online at ucc.org, and if you reach out to me, I will send you my thesis, because a part of the commitment of doing queer practical theology is inherently to decenter whiteness as much as possible, and the awareness that liberation theology, queer theology, womanist theology, these are coming from Black and brown voices predominantly, and being erased by practical theology inherently by cishet white men predominantly. We could talk about that for a while. However, the commitment in my thesis was to use a majority of resources that came from Black women in particular, Black queer women in particular. So I will say that Dr. Phyllis Shepherd is one of the main sources within my thesis. She has an excellent articles on the erasure of race bodies within the academy and also public square. And it's an essay I utilize a lot when thinking about how to talk about the erasure of queer bodies. So I will lift up that person, not this, and reading this person is not super academic, because most practical theologians of marginalization, which we know marginalization can have multiple layers to it, write in accessible ways and push on the academy to stop being knowledge gatekeepers and be wisdom givers. So Dr. Phil Shepherd is a gift of a theologian and a writer. So I'll say that there's a lot there to kind of engage with and respond to. It would take a really long time to kind of parse out that question. So that's why I'm giving you a resource to go to. And I'm also saying, if you email me, we can talk more, and I'm happy to give you the other resources in that writing.
And there's a thank you with 2 exclamation points from Shayna. Thank you, Shayna, for that question.
Yeah.
If anyone in the room has a question or a comment, please join us. If not, and I'm watching the Facebook line here, there's one more. Oh, sorry, this is from Marielle. Thank you for this. I so want to be hopeful this election season. I work as a public librarian and struggle to address those in my community who want to eliminate queer stories, queer realities, and even queer survival. I am a person of faith, and yet I cannot identify as such in my public library. I am hopeful, and thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Marielle.
Yeah, thank you, Marielle. Thank you for all you do, and holding that both and space. It's difficult, and I'm grateful that you show up every day.
Good. Well, thank you, Rachel, for your presentation for this workshop.
Absolutely.
And everyone, we will be posting this on our website with the list of resources that Rachel's mentioned and a few others that they've given us. And again, thanks everyone for taking part in this Queering the 2024 vote. Here we are in mid-October. Being politically active is for all time and all seasons. Justice making is not just for presidential election season, and yet we're trying to remain hopeful and do the work that we feel called to do. So thank you again for being here. Thanks, Rachel. And thank you everyone for joining us here either on Zoom, Facebook, or Instagram. And check out our website for upcoming programs, particularly if I might make mention of one that's coming up just next Thursday. And I'm going to share my screen here. Excuse me. And that is, here we go, someone who is an ordained United Church of Christ minister. And that is, hopefully you can see my screen here, Reverend Dr. Rebecca Vocal from the Twin Cities in Minnesota is our 14th annual Georgia Harkness Lecturer, one of a long line of esteemed activists, theologians, religious leaders, social justice makers. And Rebecca will be speaking on the topic of sacred reckonings with the doctrine of discovery's betrayal, what queerness teaches us about strategies of resistance, embodied joy, and acts of reparation. Rebecca is one of those people who really is involved in justice work for many, many years. I invite you to come to that lecture. Go to CLGS.org and you can pre-register for that. And that will be next Thursday, the 17th of October. And the time I'm blanking on right now, but I believe it's 4 p.m. Pacific time. And that'll be Zoom webinar format. So please join us for that. So once again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rachel. And see you next time at some justice making event. Thank you, everyone.